Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Megan Brown. I'm the Chief of the State Tribal Local Plans and Grants Division. I know a lot of you. Welcome to the first of what I hope will be a series of CLG coordinator trainings that we can do jointly with you and our Park Service team. We are going to try to make these happen quarterly. That's a goal. And we welcome topics and speaker suggestions from all of you. This certainly won't just be the Park Service talking all the time, but we thought this would be a good one to kick off with a presentation that some of you may have seen bits of, but that Jen Wellock in our office has been working closely with the flooding guidelines. We are going to record this. So we're going to try to record this so you can share it with your CLGs. I'm going to mute real quick. Okay. And then after Jen's presentation, y'all have a chance to ask her questions. But we also will we'll stay on the line and we can have some CLG Q&A if you want to talk to the Certified Local Government team afterwards. That is about all the welcome I have. So I'm going to turn this over to our technical and compliance lead for our division, Ms. Jennifer Wellock. And she's going to talk to us today about how to handle flooding and water. Thank y'all.
Hey, everybody. Welcome. To those of you that have seen portions of this or much of this, it may become very familiar, but I'm going to start off with some different topics in the beginning, more geared towards certified local government programs. We're going to start to share a screen presentation, and you should all be seeing that. I want to make everybody aware that there's a chat feature on Teams, and that's up in the upper corner. So if there's any technical difficulties or anything like that, please put that in the chat as we go. And we're also going to have a poll, so we're also going to put that in the chat. So hopefully you'll see that as well. So let's start at the beginning, right? Those of you who are on the call are probably very well aware, but we are recording this for presentations in the future. So I just wanted to go over what a certified local government is. It's approved by the National Park Service, and as a functioning part of government, it's allowed to compete for 10% of annual funding that we provide to the SHPOs. I would interrupt here to say if anybody has their phone on, please mute. Or their computer. Okay. Thank you. Applications for funding run through the State Historic Preservation Office for certified local government funding. And in general, it's intended for survey and planning. And there are regulations governing the procedures within 36 CFR 61. John, can you? Thank you. So for the general audience, the purpose of the CLG program is to ensure participation, obviously, of local governments in the preservation program, but it also requires maintaining standards consistent with the NHPA, the National Historic Preservation Act, or the Secretary's standards. And it's also meant to enrich and maintain local programs. So that is one of the reasons we're discussing disaster, because it is one of the topics that comes up locally. And we can help in this method. And we provide financial and technical assistance to further the purposes described above. The main thing about the pass-through funding, which is 10% again of the Historic Preservation Fund allotment that goes to your State Historic Preservation Office, is that all the CLG activities that we assist with our Historic Preservation Fund funds must meet the applicable Secretary's standards. And so, for example, if design review is an allowable cost, it has to meet the standards if it's going to be used within the certified local government. So that's one of the reasons the flooding guidelines that are, they are keyed to the rehabilitation standards. So they are in keeping with this rule, and they can be used in this fashion through the Certified Local Government Program. So poll question 1 was, have you had a declared disaster in your county or your state? So as I said, the poll questions will be in your chat. If you open up the chat window, you can respond. You can
I'll go
probably
ahead and
respond.
post that right now. There.
Oh, thank you, John. So yeah, we're going to post that up, and then you can give us a clue. And this is mainly to understand sort of what you're dealing with at your community level. Let us know if anybody has any difficulty finding the chat. There's a little kind of caption. So there's quite a few on the call who have had it. So we've got Jersey on the call and Louisiana, and North Carolina. So you've all had a declared disaster in your county or state. So, oh, just last week, somebody says in Nashville, that's right, the bombing, as well as you've had some weather there too. South Carolina, of course. So one of the things to know about this is every single part of the United States and its territories have had a disaster this past year, last year. And what the thing there is, if you go to the next slide, John, we've got a declared disaster all across the country because of COVID. So it's not just, a physical disaster that's a storm, or like we heard from Nashville, we've had the terrorist attack, but we also have COVID. And so as a result, this sadly opens the door to other disaster relief programs that require you to have an eligible disaster within the last year. So I just wanted to let people know that that exists right now. So COVID-19 was the first that makes all states and territories available for disaster funding through their FEMA office. And I put in here to check out the BRIC program, which is a building infrastructure program from FEMA that is still open. And I'm going to send that out after the talk to all of you, the different grants that you are eligible for in your communities. So today I'm going to discuss the guidelines for flood adaptation and the implications for CLG projects. This is an image of people lifting a house, by the way, back in the days when you did it with brawn and bravery. So the poll question I would ask next is, within your CLG funding, do you have a priority for funding surveys that include benchmark data before a disaster? Is that one of your CLG funding priorities that you're doing right now?
Yeah, again, just a reminder, there's a link to a Microsoft form with all the questions in the chat. That you can
but it's
fill out.
helpful to read the chat. So like a lot of people, Tennessee saying, I don't think we do. And yeah, I would say most states, Illinois, Arizona, you wouldn't see this. So, and that's one of the issues here, is that we're not incentivizing, right, the request for benchmark data before an event. And I think we could, particularly with the HPF funding. And now that we have an adaptation guidelines document that you can point people to, that's a help. But in general, though, I think we could actually maybe make it this year, make it next year, surveys that begin in your certified local government communities would include things like risk from flood, or risk from wind, or risk from natural disasters or man-made disasters. DC would have a big chart as of yesterday, but I'm just saying, like, that's one of the things we could add, but we could also record benchmark data. So at what level are the majority of the downtown buildings? Are they at sea level? Are they above sea level? We're used to surveying archaeological sites in this way, but maybe not so much for building sites. So incorporating the threats into the survey data helps you have a benchmark after the event. This photo is from after Sandy, where a shoreline pretty much was damaged and lost. after the wave and surge came through, and it revealed an archaeological site. But this could easily be something that nobody knew was there beforehand. But if we had some benchmark data, we might know to go look to check on the status. It also helps you figure out what your priorities might be for dealing with disasters. Like what's the most important building in this particular certified local government? Is it a building, or is it a landscape, or is it a beach like this? So we'll go back to the talk. So the Park Service, because we had a number of disasters and we had special appropriations from Congress that gave us funding to send out to the states and the tribes that were affected, we realized that there wasn't a lot of guidance from the Park Service beyond the regular standards for rehabilitation or preservation or restoration. But when we were doing grant projects, we realized we didn't have specific guidance. And that was the request from the SHPOs, was that please give us something we can give to our constituents and let them know that should they do this work, it will be eligible for tax credits, eligible for funding, and eligible for future work from us, from future grants. So we wrote this, the three of us, Jen Eggleston, Jenny Parker, and myself. You had to be a Jen to be on this committee. I'm sorry for the rest of you. We wrote this together. We are from different parts of the Park Service. Jennifer Eggleston works she's the chief of staff right now for the cultural, our CRAD. So she's our acting director. And then we have Jenny Parker, who was a technical preservation services. And as you know, those people in the tax credit division are kind of the keeper of the standards. They write the technical guidance. And she was kind of the lead on that. And then myself, because I work in grants and I'm the technical reviewer and had seen a lot of work together. So the three minds, three different backgrounds coming together to write this document with a lot of input from federal agencies and the states. So there's different types of flooding, obviously, and not all floods are the same. So that's something to think about when you're talking about that benchmark data. Like, are you going to just think about a one-time event, or is this, happening quite often? Is it something that's happening, whenever we have a high tide, we're seeing it, or is it something that, we just have a high water table and we get a lot of basement flooding and there's a lot of humidity issues or rising damp. So not all water impacts are floods. And so the other issue that's out there besides, dealing with the actual event is that there's a national flood insurance program and the rules have changed, and federal, state, and local requirements have changed accordingly. So there's a huge impact. If you have damage like these buildings here, you may not want to come back, because to do so, to get flood insurance, you will have to maybe elevate them significantly higher or improve them to such an extent that it's cost prohibitive. Or if you can't do that and you wish to stay at the historic level, it might cost you a lot more for your insurance premium here. So why is the Park Service interested? I think everyone on this call knows, the National Historic Preservation Act directs the Park Service to develop guidance and technical information. And of course, it's in our regulations as well to provide the technical information to our partners, the certified local governments. So in this case, the flooding adaptation guidelines are keyed to the rehabilitation standards. And those of you probably know there's 4 sets of standards. And these are the 4 up here. In general, our grants don't pay for reconstruction. However, during any sorts of disaster activity, we do have a minimum reconstruction that we might have to do, like a rear wall or something like that. But most of our projects are preservation, restoration, or rehabilitation. These particular flooding guidelines are linked to rehabilitation. So the publication series as done by the Park Service is kind of tiered. We have the standards at the top, then we do guidelines on how to meet those standards. Then there are specific topic things like the preservation briefs, interpreting the standards, or the tech notes. So this one fits in the middle. Guidelines are written in a kind of a quirky way. Then we never come out and say, you can't do that. I mean, I would like to be honest, but you have to say recommended or not recommended. So we recommend something here for masonry and we don't recommend another treatment. And that's because we recognize that there's circumstances, it's not, one size fits all with a historic property. And there's also cumulative effect, right? So we can have 20 recommended things, but over time, we might actually impact integrity. So there's no hard, fast yes, no. And there's a lot of jargon in the flood world. In fact, in any of the disaster, those of you who've been on a call with FEMA after an event or with HUD, that jargon is crazy. And so the hot word is, of course, resilient. That's the hottest word right now. But when someone in a different field says mitigation, they mean to mitigate risk. And we mean like Section 106 mitigation. What are you going to do for us for this adverse effect? So sometimes we're talking at each other and not with each other. So I just want to let folks know there's a lot of weird terms that you might have to come up to speed on when reading some of our other federal agencies' documents. So the poll question number 3, would your CLG program support creating design guidelines for adaptation to climate impacts in your office or in your community? And I think as we have more of these, we see this kind of coming forward. Well, I'm happy to see a bunch of people say yes. So that is great to see. I mean, we think that there's a need as well. So right now, these are the guidelines for flood adaptation, but I'm sure there could be more for fire or for, natural disasters across the country, wind, but also, we have to talk about economic disasters like COVID is kind of an economic disaster as well as a pandemic. So in these 2 images, on the one side, we have a Northeast museum property actually that suffered flooding. And part of the issue here is that it's also, of course, like most Northeast cities, built on fill. So that's at Strawberry Bank. And on the right is a C&O Canal that, if you read the journals of the guys that were working on the C&O when they was being constructed, they were talking about how floods were bringing a ton of materials downstream and battering their newly created aqueducts. So this is not a new problem, and maybe one that should have been kind of understood a little bit more, but this keeps happening. And some of the folks in the chat are saying, yeah, we try to work with our emergency management agency. And I think that's great when you can, work together to get to a common purpose, but also insert a little bit of preservation idealism in there, or at least trying to think about what the standards and the impacts could be for historic districts. So this is going to be the illustrated version. We did release a non-illustrated version in November of 2019, and we've been working all winter on the illustrated version. So this is what's coming. And I think the illustrations will help. So here we have prerequisites to using the guidelines. So there must be a risk of flood. There must be risk based on empirical evidence. So you can't just say, well, I think there's flood maybe in the past. You have to actually tell us, what part of the flood map you're in, or identify a past disaster, because definitely the flood maps are dated and things that happen in the past. And then there's different treatments that can be found to be acceptable. So the property characteristics are important, the significance of the property, but mostly to use these particular sets of guidelines, there has to be risk of flood. You're still looking at jargon. Oh, interesting. Okay. All right, let's.
Did it freeze for someone?
Yeah, a couple of people are saying it's frozen. All right, so we'll give you a second to catch up. It might take a minute.
Let me exit out of this and then come back in maybe.
Yeah. Yeah, so you should see a flooded church right now, which is in Hawaii. Okay. All right, Brad is back in the game. All right.
Cool.
And it might just be a lack of bandwidth on our part, so don't be surprised. There's been a lot of internet activity here in the district. All right, we'll go to the next slide here if folks want to catch up. So, like I was saying, there has to be a risk of flood to begin to use these. This is an overview of the contents within the document, and this is just a list. And I want to say that nothing here is in order except planning of more important than the other. So I think planning always comes first. All of us agree. There was some mention in the chat earlier about state plan review and just looking over state plans or adding it to state plans. And I think this kind of component of thinking about disaster. But I definitely think I would ask you to start there, because the planning and assessment for flood risk reduction is a pretty important chapter. The images here are of a theater in Indiana that, based on the documentation, we could see it has a risk of flood. So you can use historical data to kind of make your case. And in this case, we know that it's happened. And so we want to, main thing here is we've got a risk of flood. We want the building to continue to be useful. We want to respect the significance of the property and maintain its character. The format of this particular set of guidelines is it's a little bit different. It's not based on a particular material like the other ones. The rehabilitation standards are generally, or actually all of them are based usually like masonry, wood. This is based on the treatment adaptation. So you can't really skip around too much, and we recognize that a lot of treatments kind of get combined. So in this case, we're showing an example from temporary protective measures where we do the recommended and the not recommended. So that each format is the same for each type of adaptation. We've got the title, the description, its technical limitations, and then the procedures that are recommended. So there's the planning piece, right? Understand the risk. And I think that's where CLG funding priorities can certainly come in, beyond just surveying what's there before it's lost to an event or damaged beyond recognition. There's also the element of, figuring out where the elevation heights are. In some communities, if you had an elevation certificate, it would tell you where the bottom lowest floor might be that was in the risk zone. We can fund that with HPF. We don't see a lot of that. And it's a very expensive process for a homeowner, or a business owner. So it's some of those things that maybe we can kind of help and bring along and give them the tools to remain historic and remain eligible and in the districts. Somebody in the chat asked, would the credits or the tax credits be applicable if you use these? Yes, they would. So temporary protective measures are the easiest ones for any SHPO to approve. None of them would have impacts beyond kind of setting up for a future event. None of them are super difficult. The main thing is you put the protection up and you get out of there. You don't stay around and wait for the storm so you can take a cool video. So these are not going to save you. They're just temporary. They're not meant to keep the water out forever. They can be overtopped. It's just, like it says, temporary. Yeah, it's another example of just, what are you going to say is wrong with that? Nothing. The site and landscape adaptations, yes, we can have a lot more impacts with that. This image shows a house surrounded by a new berm. They could choose to put the berm through a historic cemetery or a landscape of orchards, but in this case, we're saying it's recommended you don't do that. And you see the ancillary structures are being flooded in that case through the berm, and you have to wonder about your technical limitation there is, do you have the land to do this? Fill is very expensive. You also need to think about water that can seep up. So you have to have check valves, but you've got to think about the damage to your neighboring properties. The water used to fill your location and now it doesn't. And in some jurisdictions, you could be sued if you didn't take that into account. So, John, we're frozen again for some folks.
Yeah, we might want to restart. Keep talking to them.
Okay.
At least they can hear you. They can't see this live.
Poor John, he's got the screen sharing. He's got to admit people. He's busy.
I could admit people, John.
Okay.
This is another group of site and landscape adaptations. On the left is a flood wall that was put in. It's kind of, minimal. It's the lighting is maybe not the right one for the neighborhood, but I don't know what the neighborhood is. But you see where they would put in a temporary panel when they had the flood event. And on the right is a berm, which would be kind of ready, essentially a sump, right, to take the water as it comes off the street and kind of funnel it into a landscape. And it can be done really nicely. Protecting utilities is going to be in every project if you have some sort of flooding impacts. You can choose to dry floodproof them, which means to keep the water out. You would put a sealed enclosure within the space. And most of our utilities in the United States are in the lower levels, which can be costly, after an event. And there's nothing worse than having a flood come through and you have a lot of toxic materials in some of these, my oil burners in my crawl space. So once that gets flooded, the oil gets out, gets in the creek. We also want to make sure that, we think about maybe we can elevate the utility even in that space to be above, or we can elevate it within a secondary space in the building. The other option is to elevate it outside in the exterior. Doesn't always work in certain climates. Can't have everything out there. But then you've got to think about access. Like if someone has to read the meter, they've got to walk up a stair to read the meter, and you've got to make sure to tie it down because you can't know exactly where the water will end, and it may be overtopped as well. So these are some examples of protecting the utilities. You see an elevated platform at the back of this house. This is pretty minimal. I don't think it would offend any of us in the historic district. It's painted, which is helpful, and that's one of the recommendations, is kind of keeping with the traditions that are in the neighborhood. Or you can hide it away inside a closet in the building. That's a secondary space. That's a recommendation. Dry floodproofing is a way to keep the water out. And it's hard, especially with historic properties, because we have a lot of openings. We have coal chutes, we have, window wells and things like that. So this would require you to seal all things within the water level, put in temporary floodgates, and waterproof the walls to the established flood risk level. And, you have to make sure that the sealant isn't something that would damage the masonry. It's only appropriate. The technical limitation would be it's got to be masonry. You can't do this with a wood building. So it has a lot of challenges. These are some examples. On the interior, someone is parging the inside of a dry floodproof space. And then we have the flood panel here put in the wall. That's in Charleston. And on the right is a mill building where they've had to retrofit with aquarium glass to make it completely solid. And that is a tax credit project. The dry floodproofing is not a new thing. Here's a picture from a historic example with, temporary walls built around the window wells. So it's been done. You are going to get some seepage in the general way, so you'll have to plan for that as well. Wet floodproofing is the opposite. You allow water in and you just plan for it. You've got to add flood vents to allow the water to get in, and then you've got to make sure that the flooding can get through the building. So you've also got to break open walls or have doorways that are wide enough to advance water. You'll need a sump pump to get the water out afterwards, and of course you're going to move those utilities up, or you're going to have to encase them in a way that you can get to. In general, this is probably the more likely one we'll see. Here's an example of a 20th century office space that's allowing the water in. The advantage of this, besides keeping the water out, you create a lot of pressure, hydrostatic pressure, where the walls and the building have to be kind of tied down. When you let the water in, you reduce that, but the question is letting it in at a kind of consistent rate and letting it out at a consistent rate. Sometimes you see pictures of people pumping out the water really fast, and that can lead to damage as well. So our recommendations kind of hinge on the number of vents, making sure that they're adequate, making sure the water is pumped out gradually. It's not a new idea. This is not a typical example, but it's in New Orleans. There's 2 of these, and these homes were built to flood. So they have a raised elevation of the first floor, kind of to the second level, and the interiors are cypress and glazed tile. So they have flooded, and they continue to flood, and they get restored. Filling the basement is one of the things that we see in a lot of communities where they're kind of done. They're done paying out, after an event, or they're done cleaning out. So they're going to fill the basement area with some kind of compacted soil or gravel. Main thing to remember here technically is, again, we don't want to create a pressure system. So we have to kind of break up the concrete if there's a basement, fill it to grade. We want it equal with the outside. And then we need to relocate those utilities. Here's some examples. The question for a preservationist is, what's the significance of the basement? So on the right, we have a basement kitchen, that's in Williamsburg. Is that one that we would allow them to fill? I guess it would depend. What are we saving above, right? We need to know the full context. We would hope that it would be documented prior to any sort of fill, but in general, we would recommend against it. But you have to kind of weigh it in what would be lost above it. And then on the other side, fill the basement, you've got this kind of bare bones space. That's an easy one. And the main thing here is, again, breaking up that concrete poured floor to allow the water to percolate. I think everybody knows elevation, and that's where you take the building, you separate it from its existing foundation, and then you move it up. So I think everybody's familiar with that. It's the most incentivized by the federal government. Different agencies pay for it. And it's probably the one where a certified local government has a real hand to play in this, because we're going to have it's essentially a new appearance on a streetscape. So if there are things that that particular district requires, then it's good to have a kind of understanding of what might be the tipping point for that community. So that's where design guidelines could come in, or at least a materials guidance, or how high is too high in that community. So we have some examples here, and you'll see the graphic that is of the Queen Anne and the small bungalow is meant to show you that mass matters in this kind of matrix of choice. The bigger the property, the more variation to its roofline and structure, probably the higher you can go. It's a lot more impactful to go up high with a small structure. The train station on the left, the Hoboken station going up, it's a big building. It can probably take a couple of feet, but once you take a small vernacular structure and go up that high, it really does change the character. Is that okay in that district or in that neighborhood? Is reversibility of the fill a consideration? Yes. It is, the idea being that we would care less about the reversibility if the space itself was utilitarian. It's the idea that maybe a new technology could come across that would actually be better for the building. Here's another example of a house that was flooded in upstate New York. The flood, you can see, came up to the middle of the first floor, and those are some epic first floors. I think that's a floor to ceiling height that's quite grand. And so, as I was saying, this building has the mass, to go up, and they did. So they did a little fill, and they also did an elevation of the property, and they took their temple form and kind of put it on a plinth. So they had a couple of advantages that your average building would not have, including the money to do the project. So my poll, the last poll, I think, is if you had the choice to elevate a historic and listed property out of the flood area, would your communities and your SHPO allow it? And I think that really does depend. Perhaps some of you have seen this already come in, and is it something that people are thinking about, or are they ready to do? So it is a question, how many of you out there, if you had the choice to do it, would do it?
No one's answering.
Well, because they're oh, look, so coastal Louisiana is already doing it. Yes, they are. That's true, because they have to, right? It's one of those things. Yes. Okay, Mary, I agree. It's all about the design, and I do think it's about sensitivity to that locality. It's definitely something where we want to kind of incorporate the regional traditions and make sure that we're respecting them. It's when you have someone who, has seen a project maybe in Well, a lot of times this is due to contractor kind of knowledge. Maybe there's somebody who's worked in the coastal Louisiana area and then they come up to Connecticut and they're, they're not bringing the regional tradition, they're bringing a different regional tradition, and maybe that's not acceptable, or maybe it is. There are so many variables, and that's why I think like that initial survey has to be kind of expanded beyond just architectural features. You've got to think about, what are the risks I'm trying to protect? What would I find acceptable for this community? Is it always wood buildings? Do we need the foundation to also be wood, or can it be a stone foundation, or does it need to be an enclosed foundation or one that's not? So I'm reading Katrina's, yes, buildings that have moved as well. That's another element. I'm going to get to moving, but yeah, these are bigger questions. You're right. So I'll move on to the next, because I know we could debate this all day. There's a way to elevate that involves the interior structure, and probably we would see this more on a commercial building as well, where you would elevate the interior out of the flood level and make sure that we incorporate ramps to get to the new place, but we'd allow, the building to continue to look on the street as it was originally, but we'd make the changes on the interior. Here's some examples from Galveston. These are on the Strand, and so they've kept the exterior. They've changed some of the doorways to be a little bit of floodproofing doorway. So they're trying to keep the water out. You'll see the higher base of the door, but once you get inside the space, it ramps up to a new height, and that gives them the ability to kind of get flood insurance, but also to not always have to, deal with flooded merchandise. You have to have enough headroom. That's a technical problem here. And you'll have some folks who want to gain the headroom by demolishing the floor above. And we do talk about the idea of like a pancaking to the upper levels. So that's something to be kind of leery of, because the impacts to the other floors. Now it depends on the significance of this main space as well. This was highly ornate. Elevating the interior structure may not be appropriate either. You can also abandon the lowest floor. So we talked about abandoning the basement, and this is another way, like, just let's move on to the upper levels. You've got to have enough floors to do this. You also have to recognize whatever is in the abandoned level can no longer be used for retail or any type of personal residence. So you've got to make that non-occupied space. So in many cases, it becomes parking. And at the state level, we've got to think about, how's that going to look on the outside? Because they're going to want to get the cars in there. How are they going to do it? And what happens when you have a flood? Are the cars potential contaminant? How do we figure out what to do here? But you've got to add flood vents on the interior. You have to figure out a way to get to the upper level that's safe. You have to have exterior access out during a flood. One of the things that happened in Ellicott City when they had their floods in Maryland was folks that were in the restaurant spaces at the first level were disconnected from the upper levels, but they were also not able to get out. So it's one of the things to think about. You've got to have ways to get up to the safe level that are flood resistant, and also ways to get out. Abandon the lowest floor. It's also got that tricky part. This is an example from Alexandria that we would say does not meet the standards, and so it was denied. But you've got this idea where they opened up the first floor level to do parking, and it's visible on the exterior, which is not in keeping with the standards. Plus, they added 2 new entry ramps in the historic entrances, which are kind of distasteful, and we recommend vehicle access be kind of minimized. And because they lost that floor for retail, they added a floor. And it could have been done in a more sympathetic fashion to the documented evidence that we had that there was additional flooring above. So kind of a miss, but I can see how it happened. And it's the pressures of finding viable spaces within that building that they can use for rent. You can move a historic building, as Katrina mentioned, in the past, and we have this building, which is pretty rare, the house, to actually move with all its appendages and porches. Usually those would be taken off, numbered, documented. You can move giant buildings as well, but it's very costly. And in general, in the preservation world, we don't like it because it involves a lot of, if the building is listed, we have to get permission from the SHPO, work with the SHPO to get it continued to remain listed in the new location. And those are in regulations. That's not just, it's not just kind of blowing smoke. So that is one that requires a lot of coordination and a lot of literally moving parts. So our recommendations are long on this one. Here's one example from a Park Service location where it was flooded. This particular property, they couldn't move in one piece because they were not allowed to get moving equipment into this remote area. And so it had to be disassembled and then reassembled in the new location. And the main thing here being the new location has to be out of the flood risk, but it must maintain some kind of connection to the original site in terms of its orientation or its appearance. And so that's a tricky one. I welcome you're taking a look at the guidelines before you know, as you do a project. If you have questions, of course, you can ask any of us, the authors, and anybody in the Park Service. And like I said, we will have an illustrated version out this spring. It's at the publisher now. So I know that photos help a lot in describing this to folks. So I hope that you will take a look and let us know if you see anything that you're coming up against that isn't included right now, because we can always update it. Thanks to the web. It's a lovely thing. So we're going to open it up for questions, but I did, David, I sent you something yesterday that I wanted to talk about. Oh, it was, so Storm, right.
And I'll put the link in the chat right now.
Storm is a new grant that was just signed by President Trump. It is a revolving fund for storm projects. So to be aware of it, I'm going to give it, you might see some projects come in with it. David's put it in the chat right now. We also put the BRIC program from FEMA in the chat. The BRIC program is only open this month for application. The NOFO closes this month, but the Storm Act looks to be, the states will have to create revolving funds. I know Virginia is currently in the public process of doing this, and they will create money that can be loaned to people to do incentive projects. So I will stop talking and let you all ask questions.
And you guys can unmute yourself if you'd like, or raise your hand, or put the question in the chat. Those are all options. I know this group is not this quiet.
Oh, and I posted the link to the PDF in the chat as well on the last slide.
This is a good question. It would probably be part of the tax credit training they do every other year. I don't know if they're doing it every year now. I used to work in that department, but I don't know now how often they do the training. But I agree, it's a good one to bring in. Oh, Devlin has a question. How are you, Devin?
Hi there.
Hey.
So we've had some situations in Vermont with, you know, the hardest thing is getting a private homeowner to be willing to invest in doing this. Every now and then we get one who wants to, but you know, they're one out of a dozen houses on a street.
Right.
And the result is, if it's elevation, suddenly you've got a historic district of Victorian houses, and one is 10 feet in the air. What effect, you know?
I know. And they
feel really stuck in the middle. They want to do the right thing.
And there's no real kind of middle ground for them. Like if they don't go that high, they're not going to get insurance. Right.
Exactly. But the neighbors can't afford to do it also. So it's I think that's the toughest spot that we find with this approach is like, it's almost, in some ways, it's easier once a disaster has happened and everything's, damaged and wet and moldy, then there's money to raise it all up at one time. But doing it piecemeal, I don't know how, it's really tricky.
I think it is. And it's also, yeah, I mean, even in the guidelines, we say, oh, it would be great if the community could do it all at one time, and the only time I've seen that is, works progress projects that happened in the 30s when they had the labor and the money, or after an event where they, move a whole community or they lift a whole community at the same time, because there's a lot of money there.
I guess that would be my question to the group is, are there any examples of like a whole streetscape, proactively being elevated, in a consistent manner? That would be interesting to see.
Yeah, if someone has an example, give it to us. Yeah. And also, how can we incentivize it? Like, if we want that, how do we get that? How do we say, are we going to add a tax to a business district where 3% goes for elevation, over time? Or I know in Seattle, they talked about an incentivizing tax to help them reinforce masonry. So there's a thought about risk in that. So I think it could be done. It's just, I don't know if anybody's approached a local government to kind of try and float that.
We would have a historic example in Galveston that raised the entire.
Right, but you have to have it. It's like you're saying, it's a huge disaster.
It was, again, in response to a disaster. So,
yeah. And there is a lot of money.
If you have examples and can share them, we'd be happy to kind of keep a list of those to share.
Yeah, I think we could use it amongst ourselves. You all. It'd be good for us too to have. I have a lot of historic examples. Chicago lifted buildings while people were still shopping in the 1850s. I mean, it just shows you the bravery of the people. But yeah, I don't have any modern real ones that are not still in the planning stages. I mean, Cedar Rapids moved a bunch of things at the same time, but again, after an event.
Yeah, and I think Cedar Rapids really made a decision to give up certain areas too. I don't know if Paula's on and might want to add to that. It looks like Nathan is saying, I think Gettysburg raised the street and solved some ADA issues at the same time when they buried their utilities. Okay.
Yeah, where else did I see that? It was a raised street. Where's the Moravians? That North Carolina, South Carolina? Their whole neighborhood too. The same thing, ADA issues throughout. Winston-Salem.
Jen, we had a question to ask if you could talk a little bit or more about the Storm Act. Do you know any more about the Storm Act?
All I know is that it amends the Stafford Act, which is the Disaster Relief Act, to allow FEMA to provide capitalization grants to states to establish revolving funds to provide hazard mitigation assistance to reduce risk from disasters, natural and environmental. So I think it's kind of, I think the background is that in the past, banks would not loan money on a potential project, particularly for a revolving fund. And so this is a recognition that we need to figure out a way to give people funds to do the work the government isn't doing.
Jen, I read part of it and it said entities. Would that open it up to more than just states? Like
I think it's meant to cover tribes
okay.
as well. But if entities would be legal to any type of local government, would be something for you all to explore. I just put it out there because it just passed, and I just thought, oh, that's new.
And so far, the Park Service does not have any role with that.
We may. Who knows?
We might, but who knows? I think Ruben had a question. Ruben?
Yeah, I have two. The first one's regarding these guidelines and stuff. I assume you guys worked with FEMA and to see if you can kind of dovetail this with some of their guidance because, at least here in Florida, a lot of questions that we get is, I've got a historic property, and I'm in a flood zone and 50% rule, and how do I work within that type of stuff? Do you guys envision us, like local governments or property owners being able to use these guidelines when they're negotiating with their local floodplain administrator? And I assume you've shared like this
Yes,
publication with FEMA.
We have.
Mhm.
We worked with them. Well, mostly we initially worked with them at the very beginning over just kind of to see what they had. And they have a lot of technical bulletins, as you know. So they have a technical bulletin about elevation and stuff. But they admitted they really hadn't touched this since 2006. So that was kind of their last endeavor into cultural resources. And but we did. We floated the entire guideline document past them to see if there's any obvious conflict. Because that was one of our worries is we don't want to tell you to do something that is then going to get you in trouble with the other agency. And we tried to stay away from their jargon in particular because we didn't want to have people confuse us. But I agree, there's room here to kind of take these guidelines now and to say, okay, it's after an event. We have some guidance. We know it will meet the standards. Can we go ahead and get this kind of a design guideline for this paid for? Is that one of the things we could get?
Yeah. And then my second question is more for like Megan and the other CLG state coordinators. I've been getting several inquiries here from communities who are interested in the CLG program specifically because one of the benefits of being a CLG is that it gives the local preservation commission, or what would be the local preservation commission, the ability to do all of those FEMA reviews at the local level and not necessarily have to go through the state or through the state floodplain coordinator. How do you guys feel about that? And is that really something that we should be encouraging, is essentially people seeking CLG designation in order to take advantage of an exemption that in reality is trying to make sure that homes are resilient to floods? I mean, that's kind of one of the reasons the 50% rule sort of exists. By reducing risk for the flood insurance program, you help protect the property and lower property value or the insurance rates and stuff because they'd have to pay out less. I don't know. I feel like on one side I'm open to it because it helps bring preservation to greater awareness in the community. And, here in Florida, all of our historic communities are located along waterways for the most part. And they're all susceptible to some type of flood. But on the other hand, I feel like it's kind of like short-circuiting not just preservation, because then preservation becomes more about financial incentives and what can I get for myself than preserving the resource, and I'm short-circuiting another federal program. So I don't know. I wanted to get y'all's quick point of view on that.
It's a good question.
Yeah.
I mean,
So-
it may not have an answer. I'd understand that too. I guess we'd take it on a case-by-case basis, but.
Ruben, that happened last year in Tennessee. There was a CLG that came into the program specifically for this reason, and they had done their research and figured it out themselves that this was a benefit. It was like news to me. But I was generally supportive of it because they had a national register district that would now be zoned historic for the first time. And they were establishing historic zoning from scratch. And there was a consultant working with them who showed me all these pictures of things they wanted to do with the downtown buildings that were not within the Secretary of Interior standards. And it was an opportunity to tell them, like, well, this doesn't, here are the standards, what you're proposing doesn't follow them. If you want to become a CLG, either this can't be zoned historic or you're going to have to follow the standards. And it was like, they were like, oh, we didn't realize, like, we're going to follow the standards now. We want to do the right thing. So it was like, it really was like an opportunity for this partnership. And I think they're going to be a good CLG. So positive experience for us so far.
And I didn't really to talk about the variance. in the Flood Insurance Act, there's this variance if you're in a district that's designated by the secretary as historic, you can apply for a variance to not meet the rules, which is what Ruben's talking about. But again, you're still at risk. The property still remains at risk, and so do lives. So you have to take, the importance of the building. Okay, yeah, I love that. But I also have to realize that, to stay in the risk is not what we want people to do either. So taking the variance also is kind of up in the air. It has to be, the local community has to accept that as a variance. So even though it's in the law and it helps to know about it, particularly when you have somebody kind of pressuring a homeowner, it's not necessary that that community has to do it that way. So it's a multi-layer. I think all of us should have lunch with a floodplain manager who's probably doing it as, collateral duty to being also the clerk or something else, and to try and figure out, like you're saying, Jane, how do we make it a good partnership?
Great. Anyone else have any questions?
I'm reading Alan's chat. Oh, that's helpful. There's a whole community.
Elevation example.
Yeah. Moving too.
Okay.
Well, I know that Megan, through the grants program, the Hurricane Irma grants, the city of St. Augustine's been doing a lot of disaster planning and mitigation. So hopefully as soon as those grants wrap up and we have finished product from them, we'll get some cool planning documents that hopefully will be models for other states, I hope, and other communities here in Florida. I know that my other CLGs have been asking about these types of things. And if you want an example of how not to elevate buildings and essentially almost render a district ineligible, you just need to look at Davis Shores, which is on the other side of the Matanzas River from St. Augustine. It was a 1920s development that was never built out because of the collapse of the land boom. And then it was finished in the 1950s, 1960s, and they've been elevating properties out there since Hurricane Matthew. And it's very much like a saw in a way. It just goes up and down and up and down, and they all are using different techniques and stuff. And where it's like a ranch house on top of a huge elevated basement, or there's suddenly a hill that you didn't realize there was one before, or they'll build flood walls, and it's very hodgepodge. So hopefully having this set of guidelines will help smooth out the differences.
I will warn all of you, the problem with exposure to this problem is that your standards change. You go into the project and you're like, a hard line is here, and then you see what can be done. That's a negative example like you're talking about, Ruben, and you're like, well, is it that bad? I mean, we get to see, so just be prepared, as you go through the process and see more and more bad examples, you might be willing to do a little bit more. I remember Megan and I drove around Texas after, what was it? It was Harvey, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and they're elevating ranch houses, which in the past I felt was a really difficult thing to do. But then we saw so many of them, I got to feel like there's some that are okay. You see a number of examples, you're like, oh, that works, that's okay. And it was a lot about material choice and a lot about design. So we do have
projects with historic Galveston foundations working on too about basically design guidelines for elevating modern resources like those ranches, because some of it was a difference between what color paint they used on the new elevated foundation, whether it really was glaring or not. So there's a lot of design to it as well. So hopefully we'll get some good resources out of that also.
And another example of why like a plan doesn't always tell you everything, like material choice is a big texture, the size of the members underneath and the connection to the ground. I think those were things you sort of take for granted, and then when you're kind of weighing the choices, you really recognize they play a major role. That's a whole nother, I keep telling my colleagues that help me write this, that we need to do in interpreting the standards on specific issues, ramps, flood venting and how to make it sexy, different things that are out there. So.
Looks like we have another handout.
Yeah.
JR. Is that you, John?
Yes, it's me. Jenna, great presentation. A lot of it has been on a property by property basis. To what extent is the appropriate approach based on what the rest of the community has been doing to solve the same problem?
I mean, that's always the recommended thing, would be to look at the larger district, if there is one, but also to recognize traditional kind of approaches to it. If this is an area that's flooded over time and people moved the buildings, like we see in Newport, people had been moving buildings from the commercial district up the hill for a number of years. That's the tradition. So maybe moving's appropriate, So I think you're right, John. It should be holistic. It's just disaster doesn't kind of hit like that. It hits a neighborhood on a section, might not hit the whole thing at the same time. So when we survey, that's why I'm thinking we have to think the risk for the whole community.
Thank you.
And that's also where design guidelines would come into play to try to help the community do it more in a holistic manner than one at a time. So great. Okay. Any other questions? I don't see any. So I'm going to say thank you to Jen. This was great. I hope y'all learned something and enjoyed it. And for those of you that would like to stay on, we can be here if you have any other CLG related questions. I wanted to just kind of reiterate, because we had a lot of people come in kind of after I said this, that we hope this is the first of our series of CLG coordinator training. We're going to aim to do these quarterly. But we would welcome topic suggestions, speaker suggestions. This is not about the Park Service talking to you every quarter. If one of you have a great project to share or a topic you want to speak on to the rest of the group, please let us know. And we did record this. Had a few glitches, but not too bad. We're getting used to all of this, right? So we will be posting that so you can share it with your CLGs as well. And just as a matter of kind of some CLG housekeeping, I wanted to thank all of you for sending in your contact updates for your CLGs. We are actually getting that almost completed. I think we only have a few states left. So that's exciting, because I know John and I have been working on updating the contacts for what seems like forever. So I would encourage you now, though, that they're updated, to kind of try to help us keep them updated, because you can log in and do that yourself. And most of you have probably encountered the new password login situation. We had to upgrade some things for security. Dara Green, our program assistant in the office, has been working with you on that, and she says it's going pretty well. So if you have any issues, let us know, but hopefully that's working okay. I wanted to thank Johnny Heisch for helping with this. He's been our technology guy for this as our CLG fellow, and he's also working on a lot of other CLG activities behind the scenes. And then lastly, I just wanted to give you a quick update on fiscal year 2021 funding. So you all know, hopefully, that with all the crazy things going on in DC right now, we did get a budget, and that means we have a little over, I think it's $55.5 million to go out to the states. We're going to start running planning numbers. I'd hope to have it done already this week, but we will get that moving and get those planning numbers out to you so you have a sense of what your CLG amounts will be, and then pushing the apportionment package up for Park Service approval in the next week or two. We're kind of waiting on the funding. The funding has to move around a little bit between OMB and us and those types of things. So hopefully we'll get that moving as soon as we can so that we won't be any later getting you the funding. We cannot post on grants.gov until that is signed by the Park Service, but that does not mean you can't start getting ready for your applications. You certainly can do everything in HPF online now, so you can get all that stuff in there, and then just you'll have to do the, those lovely 424 forms. So I want to let you all know that. That is all the updates I have, I think, from the Park Service side, unless my staff has anything else they want to share. Nope. Okay. Okay. So do y'all have any CLG questions for us or anything we can help you with at this stage? Oh, I see a hand up for VB. I can only see initials, so. Vicky, is that you? Vicky, you're on mute.
Yes, it's Vicki from Kentucky.
Yep.
Hello, everyone. I have to run to another meeting, and so I'm dropping off. But I wanted to say, I wanted to let you all know that I'm leaving the SHPO in January. My last day is January 15th. I feel very bittersweet about it, but I am taking a position as a historic preservation officer for one of my CLGs. So I will still be working with you, just in a different capacity. And I just wanted to let you all know how much I've enjoyed our times together, how much I've learned from being the CLG coordinator, and I am going to miss these training sessions very much. And just want to say thank you. So
we are going to miss you, but I'm glad we still get to keep you in a little way. In one way.
Kind of, yeah. Me too. All right. Bye-bye, everyone.
Okay. Bye. Okay. All right. No one else is allowed to leave, but does anyone else have any questions?
When are how are you going to share the recording with us? Will it be an email link, or
We
will
will
it be
post
a
on
file?
our we'll post it on our YouTube channel. That's how we're
Okay.
able to caption it, and then we'll share that link out with all of you.
Okay, excellent. Yeah.
We're all getting this kind of bulletin format we've been sending out. Sometimes you need to check your trash for it, but we're trying to use that to kind of do a little bit better job of communications.
Yeah, no, I was just curious because I had forwarded the initial bulletin that you all had sent out informing everybody of this training to all of my CLGs, not realizing that it was primarily for the state coordinator. So I told everybody, it's like, hey, I'll attend, I'll send out the recording. I just wanted to know how I'd be doing it so I can send it to my listserv. And then hopefully I'm going to be trying to do this type of training with my individual coordinators on like a regional basis, using our team's accounts.
Yeah, if there's something we can help with the training, any of you, if you want us to pop on and do a little piece about a grant program that's available or something like that, especially now we're all in this virtual world, we would welcome seeing new faces. So
okay,
I think, that's something we'd be open to. Yeah.
I just wanted to add it in the bulletin. I can also add the link to the YouTube video, but I can also add a link to the PDF of this presentation because I know a couple people might have missed a few slides with freezing and unfreezing. So yeah, that'll also just be a link to the PDF in the bulletin.
Perfect.
Excellent.
And yes, somebody asked about my village. This is my mother's. I put it here. I was going to take it down because, technically Epiphany, last day of Christmas, but I felt like, this is the right audience. I haven't flood-proofed any. I probably should. The little house on the right is definitely at risk.
Well, but Jen, all of them are elevated off the floor.
That's true. They're all on the buffet. That's true.
Like huge.
It is. They've been moved to the bluff. They used to be under the tree. So you're right.
There you go.
Yeah.
That works. Okay. All right. Last chance. And if there are no further questions, I hope This is a happy new year for all of us. It started off a little bit strange, but especially for those of us here in DC, yesterday was a bit traumatic. So, but hopefully we'll have good things to look forward to, and that we'll get to move around again at some point and see each other in person. And we will keep trying to get y'all some content, but do help us with ideas, because I think we have one coming on working with subgrants, which hopefully all of you can chime in about that too, but we do a lot of that ourselves. And we are we heard your comments on diversity and working with underrepresented communities, so we're going to try to find a good speaker for that as well. But we're definitely, David would welcome your thoughts on future presentations. So.
And I was just going to say, any time, any day, provide me with a recommendation on a topic and any suggested speakers. And as Megan mentioned, if you guys have a topic that you have found that you want to present on that you think would be of interest to everyone else, please let us know. And everyone has my email address, correct? Okay, good.
Okay. Well, thank y'all. It was nice to see you, and we will see you again in a couple months. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You are welcome.